to the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame. I'm Bruce Rainnie. There has been, as you know, much discussion over the past few months about the experience of the black athlete and the black coach in this country. And that discussion, thanks to Eastlink, continues today in earnest with one of the province's finest ever athletes and coaches, Mark Smith. Good to see you.
Thanks, Bruce.
You and I go a long way back.
We do.
And don't take this the wrong way, but when I think of outspoken, prominent Nova Scotia black figures in the past, you don't leap to the forefront of mind, but that clearly is changing today. Why so?
I think, Bruce, certainly the Black Lives Matter movement, the fact that in the last 4 months or so I've been contacted by a number of people, coaching colleagues in particular, to get to give them advice on challenges they deal with, identifying ways in which they could become an ally to better support opportunities for visible minorities. It certainly has made me stop and think about my own journey through sport and some of the experiences that I've had. And I think as a result of that, it's made me feel as though it's time that I spoke up and shared some of the experiences I've had, and hopefully that will hope to pave the way for people that come after me.
What is the Dr. Martin Luther King quotation that now concludes all of your emails?
It says it's not the words of our enemies that we'll remember, but rather it's the silence of our friends.
He also said that silence can become betrayal at some point, right? So
He sure did.
I'm glad you're speaking out. You played a sport, you dominated a sport in this province that was predominantly white, 95% plus, right? What's your earliest memory of either another team or other fans not liking you, not because of how you played the game, but because of your color?
I think of two particular experiences I've had provincially where it became obvious to me that race was a motivating factor. One, I would have been about 16, playing in Pictou County, and having pretty good success against an adult team, and they didn't think too much of that. And the next thing you know, the N-word was spoken loudly enough that could be heard by teams and spectators and umpires, and nothing was said. And I was the only person of color on the field, so very clearly it was directed at me. And I think that was the first time that I really recognized that I was being singled out, not because of my ability to pitch or play the game, but because of the color of my skin and the fact that I was, having success and the opposition didn't think much of it. And probably the last experience that I can think of, quite honestly, was the year before I retired, playing in a tournament in Colchester County. And unfortunately, both of these experiences are in my home province, which I'm not terribly proud of. But I remember some comments being made that, again, were very much directed at me and the black community. And I was the only person of color on the field involved in that. So very clearly, I knew that was intended for me.
And how did that make you feel?
It's the thing about race, or I guess as I see it as a person of color, is that when I can think of all of the reasons that I can decide that I don't like somebody, all of the things that can be most visibly obvious, whether it's temperament, personality, attitude, inappropriate behavior, to think that we still in this day and age are caught up on the fact that we're going to dislike someone for something they have no control over, it just doesn't make sense to me. So I struggle with how anybody can look at a person that's different than them and decide that's the reason that I don't like you. It just doesn't make sense to me, never has.
As a 16-year-old superstar pitcher on the mound, though, when you hear this, what's your reaction as a player?
Well, I think the first piece for me, because it was the first time that it was so overtly done, it caught me off guard. I didn't expect it, and I don't know that I actually knew how to respond to it. What I did come to realize fairly shortly after that was that and I take no responsibility for this other than it's just perhaps the way I'm wired, is that I was able to turn anger and frustration into a positive, in that, as a pitcher, if somebody did something that irked me, especially if somebody said something that degraded me because of color, I was able to find another gear. I was able to throw the ball 3 or 4 miles an hour harder. I was able to hit the ball a little bit harder, a little bit further. So for me, it became, to be honest with you, a little bit of a secret sauce. Not that I enjoyed having that happen, but in those moments going forward when it happened, I was able to channel it in a direction that actually made me more effective than as opposed to less effective.
You've told me in the past lots of stories of your mom and dad. Maybe what they told you in the past or how they brought you up steeled you for something like this?
You know, I think so. We were very fortunate to have two parents that they taught us to treat everybody with respect and equally. There was no color discussions ever in our home. Our house was like a mini United Nations at any point in time. If you dropped in after school, you could see kids from every walk of life and every persuasion in the home. And mom and dad never gave it a second thought. But what I do remember is a conversation that I had with my father on the eve of leaving home for the first time to go away and play softball. And he couldn't come to the airport with me the next day. And he sat me down and he said, you know, there's something I want you to remember about this experience and the fact that you're going off on your own and you're not going to have supports around you as you do at home. And he said, you know, keep your head down, work hard, take nothing for granted, and remember that you have to be twice as good to be considered equal. And from that day forward, I can honestly say that I have modeled my life very much around those words. And not long ago, I was speaking with one of my brothers, and we were sharing a moment, a family moment, and he basically word for word recited the same thing that I just told you, unbeknownst to me that he and my father had ever had that conversation. And it really sort of sent, you know, shivers down your spine to think that here we were 50 plus years later, 40 plus years later, and the words of our father still very much drove who we are, what we do, and how we conduct ourselves.
When you played this sport at the very highest level in the United States at huge tournaments on weekends, can you recall Jackie Robinson-like moments where you clearly weren't welcomed in a restroom, a bar, a restaurant?
I can think of a few. I can think of an experience in 1983 on our way to the Pan American Games when the team had gone out one night to an establishment, and for whatever the reason I was lagging behind, but I arrived at the restaurant or the bar a little bit later than the rest of the team. And you know, I often liken it to one of the scenes in Blazing Saddles when, you know, the black cowboy walks into the bar and time stands still. And it was very much that experience. I walked in and it was almost as though the music stopped and all eyes were on me. And I found my teammates, and we weren't long staying in the bar because the environment was immediately very uncomfortable. And my concern was for them. I wasn't concerned that I couldn't get myself out of there if I needed to, but I had a few teammates who wanted to take a bit of a stand. And when you're, you know, 5 days away from representing your country, that's probably not the time to go to jail. So, you know, we did the right thing and we got out of there. And then there were a few other experiences playing in the U.S. where very clearly you knew when you weren't in the right part of town, and you knew when you weren't in places where you simply weren't welcomed. And I, you know, you become very conscious of that or self-conscious of that as a person of color. And I made sure that as much as possible, I didn't go to places where I was going to put myself or my teammates at risk.
Right. Let's take a break. We're going to come back in a moment. More with Mark Smith. We'll talk about some very daunting national statistics as we continue from the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame on Eastlink. More on the black experience of coaches and athletes in this country with one of the most successful ever to come from the province, Mark Smith. You made it. You made it both as an athlete and as a coach. Many haven't, and you have shared with me recently some statistics that I think are sad and daunting. Do you want to run through those just off the cuff?
Yes, there was an article that CBC posted early last month by Devin Heroux, and it basically referenced the sports sector in the country and the absence of people of color in staffing positions in particular. One of the stats that really jumped out at me was that of 56 Canadian universities, there was one athletic director of color. The Canadian Olympic Committee, and a 17-person committee, had one person of color in 17 positions. And to my knowledge, with the Coaching Association of Canada or on the podium or Sport Canada, there is little to no representation there of visible minorities. And it just doesn't make sense, Bruce, you know, that in a time like this, with as many qualified and capable people there are across this country that are visible minorities, that we don't have a better representation in the sports sector. And I don't believe for one second that it isn't because we don't have qualified individuals to do so.
Why is it then?
I think it has everything to do with the fact that as a person of color, first and foremost, you gravitate towards careers, I believe, where you see people that look like you, where you see somebody who's been successful, and therefore you begin to believe yourself that you can be successful as well. I also think that the sports sector, and I speak to the provincial sports sector of which I also work in, I don't think we do a particularly good job of attracting people of color because we don't make it a place that's enjoyable to be a part of. And I say that when I think about the certification programs for coach education. We know that women and visible minorities are underrepresented in the sector, and we continue to hear people ask the questions of why. And from my perspective, the answer is very simple. It's because we don't make it a welcoming environment for people of color or women and girls at times to be in. And we do it through action. If we want to have a greater representation, we have to be sensitive to the needs of other groups. We have to be sensitive to the fact that if we don't have coaching programs where other people of color are able to come and feel comfortable and confident and that they can learn the skills associated with the sport, they're not going to come. So to me, it's a simple case of if we want to fix the problem, it's not a hard problem to fix. That's the thing that probably I find the most frustrating is that, when we think about things in past that the government has decided were priorities, things like wearing a seatbelt, things like smoking in public places. We didn't leave it to chance. We didn't leave it to people making the best decision to do the right thing. There was actually policy set that decided that you will wear a seatbelt or there's a consequence. You will not smoke in a public place or there's a consequence. And as far as I'm concerned, if the government was serious about wanting more people of color to be in positions, then they would simply institute policy that says that organizations, and specific to the sports sector, which is where I'm most heavily involved, that you would have opportunities for people of color at all stages of the sector, and especially in decision-making roles, because to simply allow people of color to exist at an entry level doesn't allow you to influence the system. It doesn't allow true diversity to take place. It doesn't allow for groups to grow and organizations to grow because of the diversity of thought that other people can bring to the table that are different than you and have other experiences than you. So to me, this is a simple thing to fix. It's simply not enough of a priority to government at this stage of the game to do what needs to be done.
Let's come back to that. First, though, how did you defy all of these odds you just spoke of?
Well, I go back to the advice of my father. One of the things that I realized as I've thought more about my experience is that there's a point to which I think you become desensitized to what goes on around you. And I liken it to a racehorse where they come to the starting gate and the blinders go on and the only thing that you're focused on is the finish line. And I think that what happened for me was that at a very young age, when I decided that softball was something I wanted to be exceptional at, and I was willing to put myself in a place to find out if I could be, I became extremely focused on the controllables. One of the things as coaches we tell athletes is control the controllables. The things that are within your control, do the best you can, and the things that are outside of your control, we'll deal with them as they happen. And I think for me, as I think about the last 40 plus years of being involved in sport, I've simply put my head down and I've put the blinders on and I've set my goals and I've decided that there wasn't going to be anything that got in the way of the goals. And as a result of that, I was able to find success. And I can't tell you that that was necessarily the best way to do it. It's just the way that I did it and it worked for me. But there are so many other distractions out there today that maybe didn't exist in my time. The other thing I would say that's important to note is that you need to have champions. You need to have people in your corner at different junctures in your life, people who are willing to open a door, lend a hand, create an opportunity. And I've had those people, and many of those have been white people. So I don't want for 1 second to appear to be suggesting that the success I've had has been completely self-directed, because that's not true. But the reality is that people open the door, you have to walk through, and you have to do the work that's required to get the job done. And one of the things that we as a family have never been afraid of is hard work. And I think at the end of the day, my willingness to do what I had to do and to put my head down, to work hard, to not take things for granted, I think that's in large part why I've had some success.
All of that being said, do you think that you ever lost a job that you were perfectly qualified for, mainly because, not only, but mainly because you were black?
You know, it's a hard thing to answer, Bruce, because at the end of the day, there's so many reasons an employer or a potential employer can give you for not hiring you. But, you know, there's one position that comes to mind that I applied for a number of years ago where when I didn't get the position, you know, I'm a self-reflective person. So whether I'm coaching, whether I'm in my workplace, I'm somebody that tends to go back over things to identify what the challenges are and where were the gaps in my preparation and what could I've done differently or better. And in this particular situation, when I reflected on my preparation for the position, I had researched it thoroughly. I had talked with every stakeholder imaginable that was associated with the institution. I had meticulously put together a plan and a program for how I could be successful in this particular role. And when I looked at the key factors for me, which were knowledge and expertise in the role, access to resources to be able to generate opportunities to be successful for the programming, proven track record of success in things I've done, and a reputation in the sector, they weren't the reasons I didn't get the job. Because those were things that, you know, quite honestly and respectfully, I had in spades. So when you eliminate the things that normally would be the reasons why you might not be hired, they weren't the reasons.
The mystery lives on then.
The mystery lives on.
Yeah. Listen, I guess the question is, where do we go from here? That's a question we will tackle next with Mark Smith here on Eastlink. Final segment on the black experience of the athlete and coach with Mark Smith here in the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame today. I guess the crux of the matter is the advice now you would give to someone of your color, maybe 30 or 35 years younger, although you still look good, by the way, younger than you, who would love to achieve what you have and reach the heights you have against odds that still exist. What do you say?
Well, I think the first piece of it is it's the work ethic piece. You know, you have to be driven and motivated in a way that you're not afraid to put yourself out there and put yourself in a position to be successful. You know, I think the one thing that sport has taught me is that you never know what the final outcome is going to be, but the largest part of the journey is being willing to put yourself out there and find out if you can, if you are capable. And I think for people who are pursuing sport administration or even young athletes, it's about the willingness to put yourself out there, to work hard, to not be afraid to ask people who've gone where you've gone. I can tell you that even to this day, when I see coaches who achieve things that I think are exceptional or who do things that I think they do exceptionally well, despite my being older than some of those people, I've never been afraid to ask them if they would be willing to share what they do or how they do or why they do it that way. And I think you have to be curious. You have to be willing to reach out to people and ask for help and tell them what you'd like to accomplish. And you know, I've asked very few people for help that have said no. And I think that you need to be willing to do that. You also have to be prepared to go the extra mile, do the extra things. You know, when I knew that I wanted to coach at the international level, you know, I sought the extra coach education. I made sure that I, as much as possible, tried to reduce or eliminate barriers that people could come back to me and say, well, you know, we can't hire you because you don't have this qualification. And I think sometimes that, you know, we don't do ourselves any favors as people of color if we don't recognize that you really can't take anything for granted, that you need to put your best foot forward and you need to do the research and put in the time and talk to people who've gone before you to give you the best chance to be successful.
Yeah, occasional rejection, though, if not inevitable, is probably probable. How do you bounce back from rejection? What's your advice?
I think it comes back to the preparation element, you know, much like the job position that we talked about that I didn't get. When you know you've put the time in and you've done everything within your power to be successful and you haven't been, it's not that success doesn't bite, but you know that there wasn't anything other that you could have done. And I think that's what allows you to sleep at night, is that I tried hard, I did everything I could within my power to be successful. The other thing I would suggest to people as well is that if you do apply for a job or an opportunity and you're unsuccessful, ask for an exit interview. Go back and ask the people that interviewed you how you could have done a better job. What were the gaps in your interview? Where are the areas that you could afford to improve? You know, I've, in my time of being an administrator, which is some 30 years now, I can probably count on one hand the number of people who have ever followed up with a request to have an exit interview. And some people have interviewed 2 and 3 times for the same position and yet never asked, well, what is it that I'm not doing that doesn't allow me to earn the job? So I think it's about bearing our pride a little bit, and it's about making sure that you allow the people who have the positions that you would like to obtain, or who are hiring for those positions, make them aware that it's important to you, that you want the opportunity, and that you're prepared to put in the work to earn the opportunity.
You're in such a great position now as director of coaching in this province.
Sport.
To do something, right? Previous director of coaching.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Long resume, you get it mixed up occasionally. So in that position now, you can do a couple of things. One is speak out like you are doing today, but 2 is something proactive, I would think, on the ground level. What are you doing?
We're exploring right now a really interesting opportunity that we hope will come to fruition in creating a Black and Indigenous coach mentorship program. And, you know, we're at the stage now where we think we've got a product that could be very successful. We hope to hear in the coming weeks that we're going to be able to deliver it, but the intent of it will be to provide that avenue that I discussed earlier, that safe place for coaches that are of Black and Indigenous descent to be able to come and learn what I call the art of coaching. You know, the technical, tactical pieces of coaching are things that, you know, you can learn at any workshop or coaching a coaching session. But we want people to understand, you know, how do you build a coaching philosophy? How do you administer or develop leadership skills? How do you create a culture that's inclusive of everyone? How do you deal with difficult conversations? How do you deal with parents who very clearly don't like you because of the color of your skin, not the ability of you to coach or help their kids succeed? These are the kinds of things that, quite frankly, as I made my journey through the sports system, nobody ever told me how to manage these things or was there to prepare me for some of the things I would encounter. And primarily because there were very few people ahead of me that I saw of color that I could go to. So I think the ability to be in a safe space where you can ask questions, where you can share experiences, where you can learn the appropriate way to deal with rejection or to deal with things that don't always go your way, will give them an opportunity to be prepared for what comes with being a community volunteer and the challenges that are associated with it. And also at the conclusion of the program, we hope to be able to offer a full certification. So not only will you learn the softer skills of coaching, but you will emerge with a certification that allows you now to apply to coach at a community or a provincial level.
So you as a guy who have been at the highest level of sport for now 4 or 5 decades, is it getting better? Is all of what we're talking about here getting better? Is it slowly getting better?
You know, prior to the George Floyd murder and the Black Lives Matter resurgence, if you will, I probably would have said yes, you know, but I think the last 3 or 4 months where the spotlight has very clearly been shone on the racial divide that still exists, and the CBC article that very clearly indicated that in this country, you know, diversity as it relates to the sports sector is non-existent, and from an employment standpoint. You know, I think the evidence, you know, points to the fact, Bruce, that it's not, unfortunately. And, you know, I'm one of, I think, 4 people that I can think of at the international level of sport in this country that are of color, that are in a leadership role in coaching. And this isn't to suggest that there's an abundance of people of color that could do these jobs. I mean, quite honestly, those of us that have reached it have earned our way there, for sure. But we certainly should have more people in the pipeline that are trying to get there. When I think about my own sport of softball, you know, when I retire officially from coaching at the international level at the conclusion of the Olympics, there's nobody in the system of color that is going to challenge for, you know, a head coach position internationally. And that's perhaps not to be surprised because of how few people of color play the sport. But the point being is that, I will have passed through that sport of 25, 30 years of involvement with an organization, and I will remain the only person that's played of color on a national team and that has coached a national team. And that's not something I'm proud of.
Yeah. I guess a huge part of all of this is talking, discussing. That's what we've done today. Watch for more episodes of this ilk here on Eastlink. Kudos to Eastlink for allowing this platform today. Thank you for watching as we say so long from the Nova Scotia Sport Hall of Fame.